Before we get started today, I want you to check your layers. You should have a text layer on the top that is a rasterized layer. Underneath that, you should have your big letter layer, and then a gradient fill 1 layer. You should have a group or folder that is your text copy, and that is turned off. And then you should have your background layer, which is in black. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our big letter layer. And if you recall, we left that at 20% opacity. At this point, we're going to turn that opacity down. And you can turn it down from anywhere between 2% and 10%. So if I go all the way down to 2, you can barely see it. It's still slightly visible if I zoom in, but not very visible. If you want that letter to show up a little bit more, you could go as high as 10%, and then you're getting that letter view a lot more. And you can see it quite a bit more. I'm going to keep mine at 2%, and this is just a preference thing. How much do you want that letter to show when you're all done? If you did a really good job filling the big letter in with other small words, then you won't need it to be on much more than 2%. Okay, so once you've made a decision on that, your next step is to go to your top layer, which is your text layer, which is the rasterized text layer. And we're going to add a gradient overlay to this. So if you go down to the FX icon, which is add a layer style, click on that, and you're going to go to gradient overlay. Move your window out of the way so you can see what's happening over here as you're doing this. So with this, we're going to leave everything on default, but you're going to double click on this gradient window, which is now showing as white. So just double click on that. And a gradient editor window will come up. And you want to edit these 2 bottom nodes here. Don't add nodes, don't slide them around for this, just double click on them and pick some colors. So I want to go from a blue to a green on this. So I'm just going to move into the blues and pick one. So if I move up into this upper right hand corner far enough, I'll be out of gamut, and it's your decision whether you stay in gamut or not. You can click on this warning symbol and it'll take you to the closest color that's in gamut, and it really just depends on what you're doing. For the most part, I really don't worry about that. If I'm out of gamut and I decide to print, the printer will take care of that. It can't print out of gamut, so it's going to print the closest thing that it can to it anyway. It's just if you want to have a preview of what this is really going to look like when you print, you would keep it in gamut. So I'll pick a nice blue on that on the left side, and then on the right side I want to pick a nice green and say OK. And when you're happy with that, go ahead and say OK again, and then one more time. The next step is to add a title down here. So the title is probably the name of the person that you're creating, and you can use whatever font you want for this. I pre-chose a font, so I'm going to activate my type tool. And I pre-chose the font Dido. And you may remember this font from when we were learning about different type styles. So this is a nice font to use. Now, when I just clicked to start my title, it grabbed my big M. So what did I forget to do? I forgot to hold the Shift key. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to hold the Shift key. And I'm going to bring this size quite a bit down. And for right now, I'm just going to keep this in my blue color that I used for the big M. But the color at this point isn't going to matter too much. Just make sure it's not black so that you can see it. Okay, so get your title. Doesn't necessarily have to be the name of your subject, but in most cases, I think it will be. All right, and I want to think a little bit about alignment on this. So I'm going to pull out a guideline and I'm going to just drop it right in the center of my M there. And then I'm going to take my title and transform it and move it right up against there. So I'm thinking about alignment as I'm creating this piece of artwork. And these are things you should always think about. Always be thinking about the principles of graphic design as you're creating artwork. And then I don't want it too close to the edge over here. Things that are too close to the edge will oftentimes get cut off during printing. Okay, and then I'm going to just get rid of this guideline because I only used it for that purpose, and I'm going to just grab it with the move tool and move it back to the ruler. Now what I want to do is I want to extend this gradient down to my title, and I can do that really easily by clicking on my text layer, right-clicking, and go to Copy Layer Style. Now I'm going to my title, I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to Paste Layer Style. And that will create the same gradient that I have up here. But I'm going to take this one step further. You'll notice that I'm going from green to blue, and then on my title I go green to blue again. And so what I want to do is reverse this so that these flow together nicely. So if I double click on my gradient overlay on my title, all I need to do is check reverse in this window and then say OK. And now these flow together like they're one piece. So I'm going green to blue, and then the blue picks up again in the title, and then back to green. And now I'm going to create a subtitle. So back to my type tool, and this time I'm going to hold Shift so I don't grab any of the other text. And the subtitle can be anything you want. My subtitle is going to be Who's That Girl, which is a title of a movie that Madonna was in, as well as the title of one of her songs. And the subtitle should be somewhat smaller than the title. It is a subtitle. I'm going to line these up on the left-hand side. You could line them up on the right. You could center align them. Whatever's going to look best for your composition. And then I will make it a little bit bigger. And actually, I think I will align it on the left. I'm changing my mind now that I see that. I think a left alignment will be good for this. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to do with this subtitle is I'm going to change the color. I want the subtitle just a little bit more subdued as far as color. So let me go ahead and grab that. And I picked out earlier a nice soft brown that I'm going to use, but feel free to use whatever color that you want to. And I see I need to nudge it over just slightly. Maybe a few more nudges. And I'm using the arrow keys on my keyboard for just small increments so I can get that lined up just right. Right now I'm going to File Save so I don't lose any of my work. And then we're going to continue on. We're going to add the first effect on this, and then we're going to start the second effect. So what we want to do is go to your top layer, and we're going to add a new layer, and we're going to name that Effect 1. Okay, so before we create this effect, we need to change our foreground and background colors. So our foreground color, if I double click on this, is going to be the same blue that we used for that big letter. Now, some of you have already asked me for the big letter, can I use a different color than that blue? And I explained to them, yes, they could, because for one thing, we turned the opacity of that so far down that at this point, I'm not really seeing mine at all because I'm at 2%. Now, if you chose to keep yours at 10%, whatever color you use should be complementary or work well with your gradient overlay. Also, with these next two effects, we're going to be rendering clouds, and the color you picked for this should also somewhat complement the colors you picked for your big M and also for your gradient overlay. So I'm sticking with this blue color, but I've also included a green, which is close to blue on the color wheel. So those two colors are considered analogous and they work well together. So I am keeping a color scheme in mind here. And if you want to change that color scheme, I'm okay with that as long as you keep a color scheme in mind and you're just not all over the place with your colors, because I think your result won't turn out well if you're just all over the place with your colors. If you have any questions about that, the color scheme that you're thinking about, if you want my input on that, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Okay, so if you recall that blue color, I'm using the same color for this with 6DCFF6. And that is what I set my foreground to. And my background color, I'm setting to pure black. Please, if yours looks black, please double click on it and make sure it's 6 zeros for that hex number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because remember, sometimes colors look like pure black or look like pure white, and they're not quite pure black or pure white. And it's important that we're working with pure black right here. Okay, so with my foreground color set to that blue that I wanted and my background color set to black, I'm going to go to Filter, Render, and Clouds. Now that I've got that done, I want to change my blending mode back over on my Layers panel to Overlay. And you can see that effect starting to take place. And I'm also going to change my opacity to about 75. So it's not quite as vibrant. Okay, so that is effect 1. Remember that when you're all done with this, you're going to be able to move these layers around to have the effects affect all the layers or just part of the layers. And you'll also be able to turn it off if you really just don't like any of these effects. Okay, so we're going to start another new layer, and this one we're calling Effect 2. And we're going to do this in much the same way. The only big difference right now is that we're changing our background color to pure white, and that should be 6 Fs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're going to go up to Filter, Render, and Clouds, just like before. We're changing our blending mode to Overlay again, but our opacity is going to be at 85. Now, this is all we're going to do with Effect 2 for today, but Effect 2 is not done yet. So we don't have time to continue on with this, so we will pick it up right here for next time. But one thing I want you to be thinking about is whether or not you're going to be doing the extra credit. If you're planning on doing extra credit, and that is to add a photograph to this, and I will pull up the one with the photograph so that we can see that. Start looking for images that you may want to use for this. And also you're going to need to remove that image from the background. That's really important. If I show you what that looks like, if I disable that layer mask, that looks terrible. So you cannot have a background with that image. So it does need to be removed from the background, and that takes a little bit of time. So that's something you want to be working on when you have little bits of extra time at the computer. That's it for today. Let me know if you have any questions.